Physics has reportedly reached such a level of certainty that progress could only be made along the irrefutable path traced since Newton and Maxwell. Scientists dare not say that the truth has been reached. Many paradoxes and even mysteries remain to be elucidated. Yet, there would be a completely unquestionable element of truth. All progressives believe in science. Faith in its foundations is unshakable. Thousands of scientists propose alternative theories to certain specific aspects of physics. But to radically oppose its very foundations is blasphemy. Criticism is easy, and honestly, it's only justified if one has proposals. Filling the cosmos with a fluid is a forbidden physics. This is the source of 10 blasphemies. Yet, the fluid of the cosmos is indeed the proposed alternative, which should first be briefly presented. From the standpoint of fluid mechanics, the cosmos is a fluid. The particles that make up this fluid are animated not only by linear Brownian motion, but also by kinetic momentum. Newton's law corresponds to the radial velocities of the flow towards a well in the cosmos, i.e. in 3 dimensions. The fluid of the cosmos condenses into matter. According to Hamilton's principle, fluid flows towards a sink are not stable. They begin to rotate. Vortexes form. Stars are carried along by galactic vortexes, and planets by the vortex of the Sun. First, there are the old stories, hidden in closets. Esclangon's observations thus highlighted an optical anisotropy of the cosmos inside real time. Esclangon's experimental setup was based on autocollimation of the horizontal thread of an astronomical telescope and its image reflected on mirrors. Over his tens of thousands of measurements, Esclangon observed a systematic difference between northwest and northeast readings, a difference that depended solely on the mean side real time of the observation session, and which could be represented by a sinusoidal fluctuation with a period of 24 side real hours. Sagnac's rotating disk demonstrates its rotation by the difference in the optical path of light rays traveling around its periphery in opposite directions. This is the principle behind the laser gyros installed on all airplanes and ships. Morley and Michelson's experiment did not yield entirely negative results. Professor Allace's statistics on tens of thousands of Miller measurements using the Morley and Michelson interferometer show that the measured speed is not zero, even if it is less than the Earth's orbital speed of 30 km per second. Allace demonstrated a correlation between the measured speeds and the Earth's position relative to the Sun and the Moon. This undeniable result is very similar to Esclangon's measures. The most astonishing thing is that mechanical experiments show the same correlations as interferometric measurements. This same Allace observed deviations of his paraconic pendulum as a function of time. Both the Earth's motion and the rotation of the Sagnac disk involve relative motions in the cosmos. The Earth is being dragged along by the Sun's vortex. A Michelson interferometer, placed in a satellite in Earth orbit, but rotating in the opposite direction, will show a speed of 60 km per second. There is no action of bodies on time and empty space. The magnetic field of a cathode ray, pulsed at 100 Hz, induces a voltage in a coil sensor. Cathode rays, like electric currents, have a magnetic field. Similarly, an electrically charged disk, when rotated, has a magnetic field. These experiments seem to show that the magnetic field results from the movement of electrons. However, scientists have long known that beams of electrons, protons, or ions leaving cyclotrons do not have a magnetic field, even though these particles travel at speeds of tens of thousands of kilometers per second. They attribute this cancellation of the field to a field resulting from the electric charge of the tube at the cyclotron outlet. One may wonder how this field is informed of the amplitude of the beam's magnetic field in order to cancel it out. In reality, the magnetic field of electric currents and electron beams does not come from the movement of electrons. If this were the case, there would be two potential coexisting causes of the magnetic field, the movement of electrons and their intrinsic magnetic moment. Magnetic fields result from the intrinsic magnetic moment of electric charges. The intrinsic magnetic fields of the cathode ray electrons are aligned in the direction given by the gun, but as they then rotate in the cyclotron, the beam no longer has a magnetic field at the exit. It has been assumed, without any experimental evidence, that the intrinsic magnetic field of electrons results from the rotation of the electron charge and is dipolar. However, measurement of this intrinsic field using coils shows that this field is necessarily rotational. The magnetic field comes exclusively from the intrinsic rotational magnetic moment of the electrons. As a result, the magnetic field is completely invariant in Galilean coordinate changes. In the cosmos, wave speed is the root mean square velocity of the particles in the cosmos. Waves in the cosmos can split into two wave trains and interfere. However, interference also occurs with electrons, carbon-60 molecules, and even large organic molecules. Unlike waves in water, these electrons and molecules move at very low speeds compared to the speed of light. Consequently, the waves they form as they move through the cosmos precede them. They interfere and cause these elements to be distributed in the space beyond the slits. High-pressure areas push electrons, atoms, and molecules toward low-pressure areas, which remain aligned in the direction of the bands that form on the receiving device. When two particles of the cosmos collide, momentum is transmitted according to Descartes' laws. This transmission occurs through elastic deformation of the particles of the cosmos. The elastic deformation of the particles of the cosmos prevents the particles from sliding past each other due to the flattening of the contacting parts. During electron oscillations, they transmit not only their momentum to the particles of the cosmos, but also their angular momentum. Angular momentum can only be transmitted transversely. This characteristic explains the transverse properties of light. The angular momentum of the particles of the cosmos is completely cancelled in the direction perpendicular to the Sun's equatorial plane due to the rotation of the Sun's equatorial vortex. The light reflected by electrons in the Sun's coronal K layer will reveal this gap, a polarization. But the Sun is in the galactic vortex. The angular momentum of the particles in the cosmos is completely cancelled in the direction perpendicular to the plane of the galaxy. Consequently, the light will be polarized in this plane. The Sun's coronal K layer must therefore exhibit a second polarization in the plane of the galaxy. This plane is approximately 70 degrees from the Sun's equatorial plane. This second polarization of the Sun's K layer was observed using a diaphragm tube equipped with a photomultiplier and mounted on an equatorial mount. The same phenomenon also explains the polarization of stars in the plane of the galaxy. In the cosmos, waves have a particularity compared to waves in water or air. The particles in this medium have no interaction with each other than collisions. The waves therefore propagate along the direction of emission, maintaining the transverse dimension of the emitting electrons. These elementary wave trains are therefore perfectly capable of ejecting electrons from matter, through a mechanical process. The illumination amplitude is only related to the number of wave trains reaching the screen simultaneously. The energy of each wave train is exclusively proportional to the frequency. Each wave train is polarized in the direction of the angular momentum of the emitting electrons. The oscillations of the electrons cause two identical wave trains to propagate in two opposite directions. These two wave trains are in the same state of polarization since they were emitted by the same electron. Regardless of the distance of the receivers placed in their path, they will reveal the same state of polarization of the two wave trains. The particles of the cosmos have angular momentum. The principle of equipartition exactly doubles the energy term in Lagrange's equation. The solution is then a tangential velocity proportional to the inverse of the square root of the distance from the center of the sink. In such a fluid, the energy term is doubled. The rotation of the vortices requires an energy input. It can only come from the angular momentum of the particles in the cosmos. The rotation of the vortices absorbs part of the angular momentum of the particles in the cosmos. The curve of the velocities of the stars in the galaxy shows that at the distance from the Sun, the angular momentum of the particles in the cosmos is entirely absorbed. Consequently, the law of the velocities of galactic vortices is no longer the inverse of the square root of the distance from the eye. Therefore, galaxies do not obey Kepler's law. The rotation curves of galaxies result from the absorption of the angular momentum of the particles in the cosmos in the galactic vortices. The vortices in the cosmos are the physical cause of gravitation and the rotation of galaxies and planets. The redshift of the spectra of light emitted by galaxies as a function of their distance is attributed to a Doppler Fizeau effect resulting from their recession velocity and therefore from the expansion of the universe. There is a major inconsistency in this interpretation of the phenomenon. The expansion of the universe is believed to be an evolutionary process of gradual formation of the universe. However, in this theory, atoms should have, from their very formation, from the very beginning, characteristics that have remained completely invariable to the present day. However, it is infinitely more consistent to think that these atoms also formed gradually. The evolution of atoms results from accretion. The particles of the cosmos gradually aggregate into atoms. The characteristics of atoms change gradually. Consequently, the light emission spectra of these atoms must evolve over time. The light reaching us from galaxies was emitted at times that are more distant, and therefore have a spectrum that is more redshifted. As particles in the cosmos aggregate into atoms, they become rarer. The accretion rate will therefore decrease. The redshift increases faster as galaxies are more distant. In current orthodoxy, the Sun's equatorial plane plays no role in cosmology. However, the Sun rotates faster in its equatorial plane than at higher latitudes. However, all planetary orbits are very close to the Sun's equatorial plane. However, the light reflected by the Sun's coronal K layer is polarized in its equatorial plane. However, last but not least, it appears that comets are not randomly distributed around the Sun. They exhibit a symptomatic zonal distribution when their inclination is related to the Sun's equatorial plane. The distribution of comets' inclinations relative to the ecliptic plane is randomly distributed. On the other hand, statistical analysis of comets' inclinations relative to the Sun's equatorial plane leads to the observation of symptomatic anomalies. The distribution is essentially zonal for inclinations less than 30 degrees. These two curves demonstrate an undeniable complementarity between the distribution of direct comets and that of retrograde comets. For comparison, the inclinations of retrograde comets were assimilated to those of direct comets in the same plane, thus reduced by 180 degrees. Finally, there is a striking analogy between the curve of comet inclinations relative to the Sun's equatorial plane and the curve of gas velocities around Jupiter. The curves show a striking correspondence with the zonal atmospheric circulation of the gas planets and even with Earth's ocean currents and winds. In accordance with Poincaré's theorem, a main vortex forms, concentrated in the vicinity of the main plane of the galaxies and the equatorial plane of the stars, surrounded by zonal vortices extending to the poles. The condensation of particles from the cosmos into atoms leads to their progressive enlargement. Therefore all bodies enlarge, including the stars themselves. Some planets, like Earth, have a central part that is much denser than the peripheral zones. This central part must grow faster than the less dense outer zone. The surface of these planets must therefore expand, even fracture, and the excess enlargement of the core must cause this excess to flow to the surface. Earthquakes can be explained this way, as can magmatic eruptions, whether from volcanoes or granite massifs that emerged from the bottom of ancient seas. The condensation of particles from the cosmos into the stars also causes an increase in their mass. The increase in the volume and mass of the stars causes their rotation speed to slow down. The speed of rotation of the Earth on its axis normally decreases significantly. The length of the day therefore increases. The order of magnitude is 2 milliseconds per century. These 10 blasphemies are like stones thrown into the progressive pond. Did I say pond? Progressivism is not a pond, but a filthy cesspool, a foul-smelling pit.